So we have a technical session on DEF now. There were questions in the morning about whether the Mexican government has already thought about a quality control program, a certification program for DEF, and there was some indication something will happen next year. We're going to listen how things have happened in the US so far with Jeffrey Harmening, who's a team lead for global industry services from the American Petroleum Institute. Jeff, thank you very much for being with us today. It's here. Yeah, you can change your slides here. Okay.
Thank you, Fabricio, and thank you, Mexico, for deciding to host an event like this. I think it's very important. I apologize. I will be delivering my presentation in English. I did take a few years of Spanish in high school, but that was a lifetime ago, and I can only remember the cool words like biblioteca and zapateria. Tequila. So please bear with me, and if you have any questions, because I'm giving the presentation in English, feel free to raise your hand and ask questions during the presentation. I'll be happy, and I'm going to try to take it slow as well for the translation purposes. So my name is Jeff Harmening. I work for the American Petroleum Institute. I hear a lot of your compatriots here calling it the API. We are the API. We are the largest trade organization representing the oil and natural gas industry in the United States. My office is based out of Washington, D.C., in close proximity to the capital, of course. I currently work to manage the diesel exhaust fluid certification program, and I also manage the 2 audit programs that we have, one for diesel exhaust fluid and another for engine oil licensing, which is a very similar program with which the DEF program was based upon. So we'll get right into it. Lots to cover. As I was saying, API does have a diesel exhaust fluid certification program. The primary goal of that program is to ensure that API-certified diesel exhaust fluids meet the industry-established performance standards and are easily recognized by consumers, so they're making informed decisions when they're buying the product. In order to accomplish this, we first certify brands of diesel exhaust fluid that meet the performance requirements that are developed by the diesel engine manufacturers, specifically the ISO 22241 standard. We license the use of the API quality marks on these products that we give certification to. And we do that only for products that meet the performance requirements of not only 22241, but ISO 18611, which is the equivalent standard for AUS 40 or marine grade DEF, which is not only just limited to marine. My understanding is it's also used in rail applications as well as some of the larger stationary units, and I'm sure there's a future for further application as the market develops. Finally, we monitor DEF quality through our aftermarket audit program, which I'll refer to as AMAP going forward. We do this by sampling and testing certified products purchased in the marketplace. So if you'll permit me, I'll go through each of these phases and explain the program in more detail. As we said, our program is not based off of an API standard. It is based solely off of the ISO 22241 standard, which you can see the cover sheet here. We also base our marine grade diesel exhaust fluid licensing program off the 18611. Both of these specifications, as was mentioned earlier by Fabricio yesterday, I believe, are 5-part specifications. For our program, we are most concerned with part 1, 2, and 3. Part 1 deals with the quality requirements or the specifications around the quality and purity of the product. Part 2 deals with the test methods on how to verify that quality. And part 3 is very important as well. It deals with the handling, the transportation, and the storage of DEF. just to give you an update, and I will speak about this a little bit later, these are living documents. The ISO has recently republished or published a new version of Part 3. It was published in 2017. They are in the process of publishing an updated Part 1 and Part 2, which is going through the DIS voting system right now, and publishing is probably not expected before Q1 and perhaps Q2 of next year, but there are some significant changes. So if you have been referring to the 2006 version of these documents, it's important for you to keep your ears on the rail to know when the new documents come out. As is probably implied by the title, these standards address product quality from the plant all the way to the pump where consumers are purchasing DEF. This is an example of our certification mark. You've seen this in several previous presentations. Thank you, Rodrigo. This mark is a registered trademark. It's issued to marketers only if their DEF satisfies the requirements of the most recent and applicable edition of the 22241 Part 1 standards. In a similar manner, this is the Marine DEF certification mark. You can see there are some subtle differences as I move back and forth, but this mark is issued only to those marketers who satisfy the requirements of the 18611 standard. We do all of our licensing at this point online. We have a licensing program website, which is www.apidef.org. If you want, grab my business card after the presentation, and I can give this to you on my business card if I have enough left. On this website, you'll be able to see our certification program overview, which explains the rules behind the licensing program. There's access to the online application system. There is a very popular real-time directory of licensees that consumers access frequently to verify that the products that they're purchasing are indeed licensed by API. And in addition, we provide links to the aforementioned Discover Def locator, which Integer maintains and shows all of the areas, at least in the United States and Canada, that are currently retailing DEF in bulk form primarily. Just a quick run through on how the application process works. An application is required from your company for each individual brand that will be licensed and marketed as API licensed. The application will require that you provide to us all of the supply points where your product will be manufactured, or in other words, every formulation that could possibly fill a particular brand or be delivered to a particular bulk customer. We would like to know where those sources are coming from, particularly for the aftermarket audit side of the program, which I'll get into. At the time of application, you'll have to be required to provide typical values of all of the required quality characteristics from the specification for each of your products and each of your supply sources. And you can do this through provision of certificate of analysis, COAs, that and very current COAs that demonstrate that the product is being analyzed and meets the specification tolerances. For those that are not familiar with Part 3 of the specification, there is language in there that essentially requires that each batch of diesel exhaust fluid produced should be tested completely before it's released to the public. And this has been modified slightly in the newer version because the industry has become more mature and people have developed continuous batching processes, so the definition of what is a batch has changed radically over the last 9 or 10 years. And so, the Part 3 has modernized in order to provide language such that producers can show demonstration that they have sound manufacturing processes that would effectively limit the amount of testing that they need to do. However, we do require that these certificates of analysis are provided to us. at the time of application. We also want to know about your traceability coding. It is a requirement that for products that are packaged, you provide some sort of coding so that if we pick up your product, that we will be able, through you, to determine when and where that product was manufactured so that you can get back and do root cause analysis on any perhaps deficiencies with that product. And it's also good so that to have these traceability codes on your packages so that if you have consumer complaints, that you'll be able to trace back in a similar fashion. And of course, because these are registered trademarks, there is a license agreement that must be accepted by the applicant that is agreed upon between API and the licensee. At this time, our program requires you to renew those licenses every year. And during that renewal, we also require the licensees to provide C of A's from across the period of licensing that demonstrate in good faith that the company is indeed doing the required testing as per Part 3 of the specification. We don't ask for every single C of A because we don't have the bandwidth to store all of that, but we do ask for it over the period of time. The benefits of the API certification program, first and foremost, this program was developed by the industry stakeholders in the United States. They knew that API had an engine oil licensing program that had been many decades old at that period in time, and that we were doing aftermarket audit testing for engine oils and automotive lubricants. So they wanted, when DEF first came to the US, they wanted to make sure that the playing fields were level, and in a very similar time frame that Mexico is in now with their time frame for development of this industry. They wanted to ensure that there were ways that diesel exhaust fluid was going to be available to consumers and that it met the industry recognized standards. So our program ensures that. We also identify quality products for the consumers to go out and purchase, and as I mentioned before, we provide that real-time directory as the vehicle for which they can accomplish this. We monitor API certified products in the marketplace and provide independent third-party test results to our licensed marketers. We do this to ensure that the integrity of the API trademarks is being maintained, but we also like to think that we're providing a service to the licensees to give you an outside perspective that you can, share with your customers and share with your internal quality control, folks to, bolster your product and how it's perceived in the marketplace. And then finally, we are in full support of this industry's commitment, of course, to reduce NOx emissions, and we're happy to do so. Just to give you another sort of vantage point as to benefits of the program, there are API references in OEM recommendations, and I've got a few examples here. And I thank the OEMs that have given me permission to share this. But what I show you here is from the heavy-duty sector. This is from the KW emissions system that is from PACCAR. And you can see, although it may be difficult to see on there, it's actually difficult here. It is in yellow, the statement recommended that the DEF be certified by the American Petroleum Institute. This is an example for the on-road heavy-duty trucking. As we move over into the light-duty and commercial sector, here's a very good example of what API would love to see more in the industry. But this is for Ford Motor Company 2017 model year, which I understand has continued into 2018 and will continue into the 2019 model year. For these F-250s, 350s, and so on and so forth, they're very specific. Only use diesel exhaust fluid that has been certified by the American Petroleum Institute. As we have these discussions later on and this great panel that's about to speak, these are some of the avenues that can be explored, to work with the OEMs to see if this is something, whether it's API certification or if it's a cooperation between the government and the industry here to have a different certification program. Important to maybe convince the OEMs the importance of making these sorts of specifications in their warranties. And then because it's relevant in the U.S., I included it here. I'm sure we're quite a ways from this here in Mexico, but here's the agricultural sector and commercial sector for case construction, New Holland, similar requirements for their in their owner's manuals. Now that I've explained at the 30,000 foot level what the program is, here are our statistics. Our first license was issued in the United States in March of 2009, so we're close to approaching our 10-year anniversary. At this point in time, we have 89 API certified DEF marketers or manufacturers. Our program actually licenses both. Of the 89, there are 68 in the United States. We have 12 in Canada. There are currently 3 in Mexico, and as well as 4 in China, if you include Taiwan, and one each also in Chile and Argentina. Of those 89 companies, they possess licenses for a total of 177 licensed DEF, AUS 32 automotive grade DEF at this time, and that number has actually grown this past week, so my slide will eventually be updated. Of the 177 licensed automotive grade DEF brands, there are currently 5 brands by licensed companies in Mexico, the 3 companies in Mexico. All of this information is verifiable on the API directory. We also have at present only 7 licensed marine grade DEF products. One of those are in Mexico, but as you can imagine, this is an industry that's very slow to turn over. If we think it's bad to turn, we think it'll be an uphill climb to turn over heavy-duty vehicles in Mexico. Imagine the amount of time that it takes to turn over large ocean-going vessels and other equipment that will be using AUS 40 products. So we do have licensees, but right now it's it's a growing program. Now to the audit program. The primary goal for the audit program is to test as many API licensed products as possible from the broadest geographic areas as possible. We are sampling packaged and bulk from the marketplace annually. Our cycle basically begins and ends at March, and we never stop sampling. Every year we continue to add samples as well. So our samples, our original goal is to sample these products from the same places that consumers are purchasing it. So we're heading to the truck stops and taking samples out in the field. We are going to the retail areas and purchasing the small packages that are still being sold in the United States and whatnot. So we are trying to take product at the end of the distribution cycle to ensure that the quality at the end is there. However, we have heard the advice of the industry, and we will be broadening and continue. We have been and will continue to broaden our sampling at other points in the distribution cycle as well. So we'll be hitting up the blend plants and places like that. I'll describe that later. At the time of our purchasing, it may be necessary for our collectors to review bulk shipment paperwork. It's very difficult to identify in America whose bulk product is in a tank, especially if the owner is buying whatever they can get for the most affordable price. This presents problems for us to identify the fluid. Number one, maybe these fluids are commingled. That's a big issue. Number two, maybe the personnel on site at the time that we arrive to take the sample is not privy or is not aware of who the supplier is. And so we may ask to review bulk shipment paperwork in order to make those determinations. Once we receive the samples, our collectors will send them to a primary central laboratory that we contract with, who will blind code those samples. In other words, they will put them into blind sample containers and send them to a different laboratory that we also contract with, so that that laboratory cannot identify the fluid or is not aware of whose fluid that they are testing. And throughout this process, API maintains a strict chain of custody in case we need it in a courtroom or something someday. Hopefully that never happens. It hasn't happened yet. The scope of our audit testing is shown here. These are all the tests from part 1 of the specification. Part 1 of the specification. My only note here is that I've drawn a line through 2 of them in the upcoming version of the standard that will be published soon. The density at 20 degrees C and the identity tests have been agreed upon to be removed from the standard, and I do believe that will pass the vote. So our list will also, we've discontinued testing those even today. So there's an update for you there. There will be more about it soon. Our audit evaluation method. So once we receive the data back from the laboratories, we evaluate that test data against the ISO specification limits from Part 1, but we expand the range of acceptability by reproducibility. And if you're not a technical person, reproducibility is the ability for a single sample to be tested at separate laboratories, and it's the 95% confidence level of the agreement between those amounts. So because we're testing in a separate laboratory and we're retesting in another laboratory, we expand the limits of acceptability that says that we will pass or fail your product based on that slightly expanded range. And I will show that range on a future slide. If we have any nonconformances, we will retest that at the same laboratory, retest it again if necessary, and then we also contract with a third laboratory in order to do a referee test so that we can be sure that the product is indeed failing for any one of the properties. Then once the property, all the test results come in, they are technically reviewed by yet another independent consultant who assesses the product for conformance to the specification. And then at the same time, we examine any packaging of the product, whether it's tote or drum or 2.5-gallon jug, for conformance to some of the requirements around the trademark itself, size, where it's located, how the company name is perceived on the label. Licensees are notified of the test results, passing and failing, through the online licensing system. So when an audit is marked as complete, you will be alerted, and if there's a need for you to respond, you will be alerted in a different manner, but alerted nonetheless. All nonconformances to the specification and to use of the mark must be addressed to the satisfaction of API. In addition, API may be requested by the retailer where we purchase the sample to notify them of what the test results were, but we do not share the test results with anybody but the licensed marketer. However, we will share with them the nature of the sample, whether it passed or failed, upon their upon their request. As I said, emphasis is placed on the confidentiality of the test results. It's why I will not be sharing test results with you here today. I only share test results with the company whose product we have sampled and tested. Enforcement action is taken as needed. We will ask for corrective action and supporting documentation for many root cause analyses. If you cannot convince API that it's resolved to satisfaction in that manner, API resolves the right to cancel your product license, so remove the product from your license, or if necessary, remove your license completely and remove your company from the license directory. At the same time, we would also ask for an immediate recall of the product, because that product being out in the field in the condition that it is harmful not only to the consumer's equipment, but it's harmful to the reputation of the industry and harmful to the reputation of the API trademarks. So we do strictly enforce our recalls when necessary. And finally, if none of the above can be accomplished, API does have rather large legal department that can get involved. So we can take legal action. We've done so on the engine oil side, obviously. I'm happy to say we've not had to go that route with DEF to date. Our API audits result in system improvements. You can see here there's a big list, and I'm not sure if we're over time. Should I speed up, or are we okay to continue? Okay. I'll run through just so the translation comes through. On the manufacturing side, some raw material inputs have changed as a result of API audits. There's been new DI water systems installed. Defective sensors have been replaced. Filters have been added or replaced or maintained. And then fill and transfer lines have been dedicated to DEF only, whereas in the past they were used to distribute other fluids. On the quality control side of things, there have been many procedural improvements where rinsing procedures for reusable tanks and filling equipment have been adopted. We have, there have been increased test frequencies and increased independent laboratory tests of products. People have increased the frequency of their retains and the retention time of their retains. And then in some cases, there have been the addition of auto-sampling equipment to help with that previous bullet point. And obviously, re-education of employees responsible for the manufacture process. And to a limited, we hope more than limited degree, there's been a lot of customer education as a result of this, especially in the transportation, handling, and storage of the DEF. The audit summary, so to date, most of our samples have been collected in the US and Canada. We have several other countries that we've sampled. To date, on this particular cycle, which ended last March, we collected 695 samples. Most of those were, unfortunately, bulk, because not a lot of our products, a lot of the bulk products sold in API, some of them are not API licensed. So as I said before, we try to sample the API licensed products. All the categories that we sampled in have exceeded the previous 3 audit years combined. So we've really dedicated an effort to ramp up the number of samples that we're doing annually, and we're going to continue that pattern. The big statement here is that the overall conformance rate for 2017 is 95% passing. We did have 5% exhibiting failures. Here's a brief breakdown. Since I'm running out of time, I got a few more slides of the types of places that we're sampling. You know, for bulk samples, trucks and travel stops are the big ones. On the package side, it's the retail stores, but my presentation is available for you later, so you can digest that perhaps later. Some of the trends that we are seeing on the left side, we have bulk conformance, and believe it or not, that actually appears to be on the rise. In the dark red is from 2014, in the light red is 2017. Oddly enough, the performance of packaged products did take a slight dip in 2015 and is on the rise once again. So interesting trend there. Normally on engine oil we see higher degrees of failure in bulk than on packaged, but it seems to be a little different here for DEF. Remember, we're dealing with very close numbers there in terms of percentages. These are the types of failures that we see. What I've done is added up all of the different properties that have failed for the past 3 cycles. And as a note, a single sample can fail for more than 1. So these numbers do not represent the total samples that failed. But you can see right here in the red, top of the list, sodium and calcium are the 2 big offenders when it comes to failing properties. This led me to take a look at some of the issues with water purity, and here I will show you on the left the frequencies of water quality failures. Again, like in this case, light color represents calcium, dark color represents sodium, magnesium in the middle, but you can see 2016, 2017, the percentages of the total failures that were failures on sodium were up to 6% and 4%. So these numbers are climbing over the period of time. So I went even a little deeper, and I took a look at not just whether a product passed or failed, but I took a look at what the laboratory reported as a measurement. And of course, what I did was I counted the number of non-detect measurements as another way of maybe visualizing how there is a climb. Certainly, maybe there are products that pass the specification, but are we starting to see reports that don't have a minimum non-detect sort of report and did report some measurable amount of sodium and calcium and magnesium? And again, you can see here the big offender was sodium, calcium. was the big offender. In 2015, we had a huge drop of measurements, which is maybe anomaly. It's something that we have to go back and check with our laboratory. But you can see the difference between magnesium and sodium and calcium there is almost by 10 or 15%. So this, again, is another indicator that measurable amounts of sodium and other water quality properties are on the rise. And this is a big deal because on the new standard, when it's published, they did some new repeatability studies, precision studies for some of the tests. And they took a look at the old data from 2006 and reanalyzed it against the current ISO 4259 specification. And I've got information there on the right-hand side. These tolerances for acceptance, when you include reproducibility, are going to shrink basically down to the specification limits. So in the past, if your test laboratory was giving you results that said your product was passing because it might have exceeded ISO, but it didn't exceed reproducibility, in the future now, that's going to be a far less common case. So water purity issues are going to be on the rise very simply from the change in the specification. And it's a problem that the industry needs to wrap its head around and figure out ways to prevent problems with water quality. As I said about the specifications, this is a useful slide. Change is coming to reproducibility, and so it's coming to the way that same change is coming to the way that we evaluate our samples. But I provided the limits, specification limits here, along with the old 2006 plus reproducibility, and then what I'm calling 2019 limits plus reproducibility. The important column here is that on the right-hand side, the effect on the new acceptance ranges is, in some cases, believe it or not, going to increase, but on most cases is going to decrease. We do, as I mentioned before, we have cases of infringement that we have to take very seriously. So we do chase down illegal use of the certification marks and any false claims of API certification. We do this by issuing a list of demands, which includes label changes, destroying existing label stock, immediate product recall, and posting a public notice to all their consumers on their websites and other marketing materials to let them know that they were using the API trademarks without permission to do so. And failure to meet these demands and resolve API satisfaction can result in the involvement of API's general counsel to ensure that the matter is brought to a close as quickly as possible. Just a quick snapshot here. These are some examples of recent cases that we've had. I won't spend a lot of time on this. You can go through it later on because I'm out of time. For the future, we have audits underway already for 2018. To date, this cycle began in April 1st. We've already collected over 500 samples, and we have until March 31st to continue building upon that number. We are going to be increasing our Mexico sampling, especially as the number of licensees increase in Mexico, and we can build new avenues for collection purposes. So that we can find ways to obtain samples and get collection staff down here to start reviewing the quality of the API licensed DEF available in Mexico when it, as it becomes prevalent. We will be adding plant sampling to our program. Whoops, I'll go back one, sorry. Our licensees will be asked probably next week when I get back to the office to disclose all of their blend plant locations, any source that their product is being manufactured. If that's a dissolution terminal somewhere, if it's a prill blending site, any site, even those sites used in emergencies whenever urea supply is disrupted, we'll be asking for them to provide to us a listing of where their blend plants are and where they source their material. And then what API will do is begin to strive to sample each of these blend plants randomly and routinely if we're permitted to do so. We will hopefully key in on random unannounced access. That's what we would like for obvious reasons, but that's not always an option. And finally, we may, at random, when we show up, just ask to take possession of a retained sample if allowed. And then we're going to add improvements to our system to better track these points. As I mentioned several times, this is for your information. The ISO is updating. I won't go into this as I'm out of time, but you can talk to me about it afterwards. And this is another industry group that is making standards relating to DEF. It's ASTM D1525. To date, they only have one standard. It has to do with handheld refractometer determination. And then my slides needs updated because the meetings were a couple weeks ago. So, and then these are the marks. This is on the left, the API starburst for engine oils. You've probably seen them in maybe your owner's manuals. And then the donuts for the various types of passenger car and heavy-duty diesel engine oils that are licensed through our program. We have, in that program, 18,000 different licensed brands. So it's very large and very well represented in the industry. With that, I'm sorry for going over. I hope Chad maybe has a short speech. Who knows? If you have any questions, pull me aside. I'll be here for the rest of the day, and we'd love to give you a business card. I do believe we have a question over here. Un momento.
Buenas tardes, Arturo Celis de Energía y Lubricantes.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Buenas tardes, Arturo Celis de Energía y Lubricantes. Quisiera saber cuál es la diferencia principal entre la certificación API y la certificación de la VDA para poder usar el registro de AdBlue.
Very good question. The difference between our programs, when API was consulted by the stakeholders to put together a program, they wanted it to resemble the engine oil licensing program, which had several decades of experience. At the same time that we created that program, our program focuses heavily on the finished product and the quality of the product where it's being picked up by consumers, whereas I understand the VDA program is very heavy on the production side. To get a VDA license, it's an inspection of the plant. It is an inspection of the quality system of the plant, and also in addition to sampling and testing and concerns with quality of the finished product as well. It's just two different, sort of approaches to hopefully the same goal. Both programs are highly concerned with quality product being delivered to the consumers. We just take two different approaches. For us, we believe that this would be a quick and economic way for a program to be put together, and also give consumers assurances that products out in the marketplace were being tested, and that's been our focus and will continue to be our focus.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So we have now another presentation on DEF and with